Our theme today is seizing the advantage, and our many guests will deliver and present what's meant by that. And indeed, you will see at the end, and we'll sum up how we seize the advantage. Now, where would seminars be without key sponsors? So we wish to thank Kilimanjaro Consulting as our key sponsor, and are also our trusted advisors to user groups in Australasia. Indeed, our first keynote speaker is here to welcome you and declare the user group forum open. From our key sponsor, Ronnie Baskin is the Kilimanjaro's founder and CEO of now Kilimanjaro Consulting in all of Australasia. So Emprise Solutions, that name will relinquish up to the mothership, which is the Emprise Group that owns the Kilimanjaro Consulting. And the CEO today, our keynote speech and sponsor is Ronnie Baskin. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here to the stage. Ronnie, take us away.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction and for that explanation of the merger between Kilimanjaro Consulting and Emprise, resulting in Kilimanjaro Consulting Australia, New Zealand. All of you that are attending today, I hope that you are safe and dry. We're having some really, really unusual weather here in Australia, particularly on the eastern seaboard. So stay safe and let's see how we go. And what I'm going to do today is just take you on a little bit of a journey. It's a little bit of a personal journey in terms of seizing the advantage. When I saw the topic, I did start wondering whether I had, as a businessman, had actually seized the advantage or the opportunities that had been presented to me along my journey, or if I just allowed existing events to take their course and played a passive role. And it did start me thinking. I originally come from a farming background. And when you are dealing with commodities, as in grain and so on, the advantage that you can take is very different to the advantage you can take when you're in businesses like those that we're all involved in now, you as end users of MYOB Advanced, etc. So when you're in commodities, one man's grain is the same as another man's grain, and one piece of coal is the same as another piece of coal. So it's very hard to differentiate and to identify competitive advantage on the basis of actual product and features. So anyhow, I titled my musings today, From Growing Grains to Growing Pains. And I'm sure that all of you here today have been through these cycles of business where things appear to be going fantastic, wonderfully well. And then all of a sudden you hit some sort of a ceiling and things slow down and you think that tomorrow you're going to hit the wall. The cycle of growth, and we've discussed this before in these forums, the cycle of growth, it's not linear at all. And if you look at these numbers, these are actually USA numbers. The AU and NZ numbers are not that different, that only something like 4% of businesses actually manage to get beyond the $1 million turnover mark. 0.4% of businesses manage to get beyond the $10 million mark. And the number of businesses that get beyond the $50 million mark are really just a rounding error. Very, very few businesses get there. So we're going to look at how you can leverage off your competitive advantage in going along this journey. Having said that, growth is not for everybody. Most businesses operate on a balance between profit and growth. And generally what happens is that as growth goes up, profit will come down, or vice versa. And the unknown in this equation is really risk. So by adjusting the amount of risk that you're willing to take, you can possibly increase profits or increase growth. My own risk profile, I'm pretty risk averse, but I have made some observations of 6 things that I think I have learned along my own journey. So first of all, knowing your destination. Secondly, understanding your competitive advantage. And thirdly, planning your route strategically. To carry on from those, aligning your plans with your strategy, systemize, embed your processes in order to scale, And that one, number 5, the systemization, some of the other speakers are going to be talking about today as well. And then finally, to beware of the hype. So let's start with the first one, knowing your destination. So I think this has been described in various ways. People have said, begin with the end in mind. People have always said, it's the journey that's important, not the destination. But if you don't have a destination in mind, then you can't even go on the journey. So this really is a starting point of sitting down and saying, where do I want to end up? I worked with a development agency in Southern Africa for many years, and they had a very robust planning cycle. And I learned from them this hierarchy of overall goal, purpose, results, and activities. So it would go something like this. You would say that the overall goal is to improve the quality of life of people in rural areas. Very nice, very altruistic, but what are you actually going to do about it? You would then distill it down and you would say, in order to improve the quality of life of people in rural areas, we are going to provide education, or we're going to provide running water, or we're going to provide health services, because on our own, we're not going to achieve that goal. We will segment and say what we are good at, and that's what we're going to do. And then you would set yourself what are called SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So you would say something like this. You would say, by 2030, 75% of communities in whatever the defined areas that we're working in will have running potable water. And that's a SMART goal. At the same time, that goal can be challenging. So even though we're saying it must be achievable and realistic, it must also be a stretch. And this is what a lot of people refer to as the big, hairy, audacious goal. The next point to look at is, what is your competitive advantage? You can't seize it unless you understand what it is. So to do this, you need to look at the customer's perception. It's not how you perceive your business, it's how the customer perceives your business. And the customer will perceive your business based on a number of different values. So for example, price, quality, time, functionality, service, relationships, etc., and brand. And it's all in the mind of the consumer. So if I was to say to you, is a Kia better than a Hyundai? It depends on who you're asking. Is a Skoda better than a VW? It depends on who you're asking. And it's really important that you understand your customer's perception in order to identify your competitive position and your competitive advantage. So to do that, what I've done is I've drawn a matrix over here. So along the bottom of the matrix, and I'm just going to make my slide a little bit easier for me to read. At the bottom of the matrix over here, you've got price, so from low price to high price. And at the left-hand side on the vertical axis, from a low perceived value to a high perceived value. And generally, what's going to happen is that if you can position yourself at a high perceived value, then you've got much more flexibility in terms of your price, and you've got much more opportunity to succeed in the market the higher your perceived value is. On the other hand, if you are positioning yourself at the bottom over here, which is of low perceived value, this is the commodities end of the market. One man's coal is another man's coal. And if you try and differentiate yourself there on price, you just can't do it. Your price is determined by the market, and the perceived value doesn't play a role. So that to complicate matters, the straight line is not actually a straight line. It's actually a curve, something like this. And the higher you go up in the perceived value scale, the more difficult it is to stay in this market success likely segment of the graph. And the same thing again at the other end, that the higher up you go in price with low perceived value goods, the more likely market failure is. But the majority of businesses sit somewhere here in the middle with a big question mark, and that is where success is highly uncertain. And what you have to do, if you're identifying that you're sitting in the middle over here, is you've got to move yourself into an area where market success is more likely. Related to this is the question of, how am I going to make my money? Am I going to make my money at the commodity end of the market, where it's simply about managing my costs of inputs, fewer inputs, greater outputs, higher yield of my grain, etc., etc.? Or are you going to make your money at the top end of the market, where it's about the perceived value? And economic logic looks something like this. You're either going to make your money through lowest cost, or you're going to make your money through premium prices. And you need to understand that before you start putting your strategy together. Then you can start planning. So once you know where you're going, you know what the route is, you can decide what the best route is to get to your destination. This is a little map of climbing Kilimanjaro, and you can take many different routes to get there. Some of them are quicker, some of them are more difficult and slower. What you need to do, and this is a slide I've used before in these user groups, is look at your basic strategy and look at the company internally and externally. Above the line, you are in control. In other words, you can make the changes. There's nothing that's going to, there's nothing else in your way other than what you're doing in the organization. You therefore need to understand what your weaknesses are, where you are poorer than your competitors, make those into strengths, and then you can use your strengths to take advantage of the opportunities. And that's called an offensive strategy. You can also use your strengths to offset threats in the external environment. The external environment is not in your control. Floods come along, COVID-19 comes along. There's nothing you can do about it other than to respond on the basis of saying, are there opportunities or are there threats? And I'm going to use my strength to offset those. You certainly don't want to be using your weaknesses to try and take advantage of an opportunity. That's called a temptation. And using a weakness to offset a threat is called a vulnerability. So you want to exclude those. You want to exclude those too. The next thing you need to do is you need to align your plans with your strategy. So as I explained in the beginning, overall goal, purpose, results, activities, all nicely aligned. The benefit that this gives you is it simplifies decision-making down the track because you've already answered those bigger questions. So for example, if our strategy is we're going to be an employer of choice, when it comes to a question, are we going to allow employees to work from home during COVID, for example, the answer is apparent because your strategy has already defined as an employer of choice, you're going to do that. So whether you follow this framework or you follow a framework which is just really strategy, business planning, business systems, doesn't really make any difference as long as you have alignment and that you know the destination and you stay on track in going towards that destination. Now we're going to look a little bit at how we seize the advantage. And seizing the advantage in these sessions, we are talking about systems. We're talking about embedding your processes in your systems in order to scale, or as we've said earlier, not everybody wants to grow. So it would be embedding your systems in order to improve your efficiencies and therefore lead to better profitability. And specifically on business systems would then be defined as your production systems, your distribution systems, your IT systems, and your financial systems. Those four over there. Now, to take that a step further, because we are looking specifically at your business systems at the moment and at your financial systems, there was some research done by Gartner where they looked at different types of financial systems. And they came up with a bit of a hierarchy that looked something like this. At the bottom, your systems of record. This meant everybody had the same systems in order to just simply keep records, bookkeeping records, accounting records, records of what's arriving and what's being dispatched, etc. Common ideas, downloadable off-the-shelf type software, Xero, MYOB, Essentials, whatever it is. We're all on the same platform, common ideas, no differentiation. Standardization, looking at operational efficiency, and to a degree, compliance. As your business evolves and you start leveraging off this competitive advantage and seizing that advantage, you want to look at a system of differentiation. And this is where you want to have a system that's configurable, unique processes, embedding your ideas in your own systems, making sure that you are competitive and leveraging off that advantage. And then finally, once you've gone through that milestone, you probably want to start looking at new ideas and to be absolutely at the cutting edge and be the innovator and looking at systems of innovation. So to translate that more into a more meaningful and practical format, this would be the journey of a company from startup, going through these systems of record to get to some sort of a transition point over here, which all of you would have gone through already, where you go onto some sort of a system of differentiation. And you may go through multiple phases of that as you require more differentiation, you need to change your systems, and then eventually getting onto some system of innovation. And as we know, and we've said this a number of times, business growth is not actually linear, and it goes through these phases. So you get into these, well, hopefully not the valley of death, but you go through a rough patch, get your systems back up to speed again, and you back into the growth. So at the bottom end over here, your systems of record. In the middle over here, your systems of differentiation. And at the top end over here, your systems of innovation. And then finally, point number 6, I've said beware the hype. And this is particularly true of technology. When new technology emerges, we all know what happened a decade ago with the internet. We were told cloud systems were the solution to everything. We didn't have stable internet connections. The line speeds were too slow. It was a little bit of a disaster. It went through this peak of inflated expectations. It went through a trough of disillusionment. But where we've landed today is on this plateau of productivity. So even though, and this is what most software providers will do, is go to market a little bit early with what's called minimum viable product, take the hit in going through this trough of disillusionment, but over time, getting to this plateau of productivity. And that's what we're talking about today, is that how do you operate in the plateau of productivity over here and seize your competitive advantage? So from a personal point of view, the lessons that I've learned in my business then are, first of all, differentiate so that you move beyond being all things to all people, continuous improvement, integration to best of breed. No one system can do it all. So don't be afraid. The technology has moved to a point at plateau of productivity where integration is not a dirty word with systems like advanced. Leverage off technological advances. You might not want to be bleeding edge, but you can still be cutting edge, and build relationships with your trusted advisors. And that, Grant, is my tuppence worth of my little journey from a farmer to a business owner, and how I perceived my seizing of advantage.